And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Parent.
And I'm Mark Seifter.
Do you not remember how this works, Mark? I do a little preamble, and it's like, and we're with Mark. I'm sorry. I should have gone over it with you, but you've been on a few times now.
It's been a little while.
That's all right. We're changing things up for this episode anyway, because this is about the Game Mastery Guide, but it is not a review. It is a breakdown of the Game Mastery Guide. We are going to go chapter by chapter talking about what we liked about it, and then Mark is going to give us insight from the design point of view because he is Paizo's design manager, and he worked extensively on the Game Mastery Guide. How extensively would you say you worked on this book, Mark?
Very extensively.
Excellent.
I would say that because of the fact that Steven left like shortly into the Game Mastery Guide and we didn't get Liz until right near the end of the Game Mastery Guide, that Logan and I did a huge amount of the Game Mastery Guide. Although we got to have some very interesting effects of like Liz freelancing for it and then editing it and then becoming a designer and doing design things, and Steven designing some parts but then leaving and getting freelance for some other parts that then came back in the opposite direction, which was kind of cool. But
so one thing I do want to say before we get it started is that for this new format, it's like the one we did for the character operations manual on our Starfinder Beyond, where Owen was playing the role of the insider. Let us know if you enjoy this format and what you think of it.
I will play the role of the Owen.
Then you have to steal my hat.
I can't steal your hat. I'm all the way over here.
Didn't stop Owen.
Wow, that's impressive.
So a couple of quick facts about this book. It is 258 pages, or at least the PDF is. It is the third hardcover book in the RPG line. So the sixth hardcover overall when you count the Lost Omens books. And it is different from the previous Game Mastery Guide, I would say, in that one was, the first edition one, I should say. That one was kind of seen as unnecessary and overlooked, whereas in my opinion, the Game Mastery Guide kind of completes the main rules you need to play second edition. Param, thoughts on that statement?
I appreciated the Game Mastery Guide when it came out. I always like the quote-unquote DMG2 books that have been released for the various editions. And the Game Mastery Guide was kind of trying to fill that role. And of course, most famously, it had the NPC gallery, which kind of had a humongous effect on Pathfinder from that point forward.
Right, even spun off into its own hardcover of that style.
Its own kind of hardcover line. I mean, we never got the NPC gallery too, but we got like the monster gallery and a bunch of other inspired things.
Codex.
Oh, codexes, right.
Yes.
And it's only been a few months. I should remember the names of the books I love.
Oh, no, it's fine.
And
so what were some of the design goals of the Game Mastery Guide for second edition, Mark?
Well, so just like in Pathfinder First Edition, Pathfinder is in a situation where all of the Game Master rules that you need to play are in the core rulebook. It's not. There's some other games where you actually literally can't even get started until you have the set of some kind of a monster book, some kind of a player book, and some kind of a GM book. That's sort of the other model, and our model is still everything you need is the core rulebook plus get a monster book so you have some monsters. So we knew that we weren't going to be that third book that has rules that are necessary for the GM to play. But we thought that without making it so literally necessary that you can't even play the game without it, that we could still make it like as essential and useful as a book as possible, something that you would like to have on your bookshelf and that you could use from if you're a GM who's just getting started with Pathfinder to a GM who is extremely knowledgeable and wants to mod the heck out of the game. And we wanted to have stuff that was going to be something that all of those kinds of GMs say, this book is useful. This book, I'm so glad that I have. I don't feel like I was forced to buy it, but that I really like that I bought it.
I want to not go into like my final statements this early, but I will say that this book surprised me after reading through it. I didn't think it would be this book, what it has in it. And I I've gone back to reading it a couple of times since doing the cover to cover.
Is that good?
Yeah. I like this
that would be
book.
a spoiler.
I will say that.
Spoiler.
I like this
Spoiler.
book a lot, and I will tell you why I like this book a lot through this episode.
Yeah, we are going to do that cover to cover right now in real time, starting with the art. So let's start with the art on the cover.
Okay.
There was a blue dragon on the Game Mastery Guide version 1, right? Oh, sorry, first edition?
Version 1 is Karzug with a blue dragon. This is an intentional callback because by that point in time, your players had killed Karzug and his little blue dragon too. Well, now you've killed Elasnest. So, in Return of the Rune Lords, so we've got Elasnest and a black dragon on the cover.
Oh, I think you have too much faith in how well my players did in Rise of the Rune Lords.
Okay, they may have died. Like in my Rise of the Rune Lords game, everyone agreed at the end Karzug deserved to win because he had killed like almost 20 PCs, and if it weren't for the fact that an equal number of high-level PCs appeared every time one of them died, like the law of statistics should have meant that he got to rise.
I do like this cover quite a bit. It's striking. The colors are really nicely balanced. I really like the yellow around the throne area. It's a book that even without reading the title, I immediately recognize it already.
I really like the callback. Like seeing little touches like that throughout a lot of the art second edition has had. The cover for the beta this here, it made me feel good that you guys didn't try to just rapidly depart from a lot of the design aesthetics we have learned to like of first edition.
Yeah, I have to say, I like the callbacks, but I really want to plug the kind of covers in Lost Omens that just don't look like covers we made before, because they super excite me. Like the triptych on Gods and Magic, or the pictures on some of the other ones. They're just all different, and they're cool, and I like them too. I like both. I like a little bit of classic and a little bit of innovation.
Right. In fact, we had a pretty in-depth chat about that on the Facebook thread where we caught that you guys leaked a Lost Omens Pathfinder Society Guide, which we will talk about after this breakdown.
I almost said something about it, but I knew you were going to talk about it after the breakdown, so I tried to hold off.
Yeah. So for those of you excited about a new book that has really only been teased for a couple of days as of this recording, hang on through the entire episode, not like you would leave a review episode early, because we've got more exciting stuff after that, and Mark has some insights on that as well. And also why I even said that sentence is that cover's amazing.
It's awesome.
Getting to some of the art on the inside. A lot of my favorite pieces are actually later on in the book. So before I get to those, starting around, chapter 5, where we've got Ezrin looking at all of the portraits.
Mm-hmm. That's chapter 4. Oh, you like the one where I ordered for that chapter. Thanks.
I love it. So we'll start with there, even though it's not chronologically the right place to start. Yeah, it's just Ezrin looking up at a dozen portraits of him, but not quite him. And his face is kind of analyzing it, but he's got his one right hand just looks like he had a scroll or something and he dropped it, and he's just like really taking in what the ramifications of this would be. And I can really see dropping a scene like this on my players and just being like, yeah, you walk into a room, it's full of paintings of you, but not quite you. And it's perfect that this is the opening for the Variant Rules chapter.
I think this would be the one time my players decided they really needed to know about the backstory.
The backstory of just a piece of art that was in the book, or
no, if that was their characters.
Oh yeah, right. It's all the possible futures of yourself in using different variant rules, and so that's sort of that was the idea behind that one.
And was this specifically what you had put into the art order, that it was like it is a series of portraits of him in wildly different situations?
So technically, we do the brief, and then the art team magics it up to send out for the official final order. Okay. And I know that when it came to the chapter openers, while chapter 4 is where I did all of the orders within the chapter, I also worked with Logan on the chapter opener because he was looking at all of the overall chapter openers together as a whole. So I cannot claim significant amount of credits for the chapter opener because of how many people go into that. And of course, the artist did an amazing job, right? That's the number one. But I did order write the brief for this chapter in general and did a lot of work on this chapter.
So what is a brief exactly? Like,
so that's where we go. We have like a little database program, and we put in like, hey, Ezran Portrait Gallery is the name of this. It is chapter 4. It's a full-page piece of art. The iconics that appear in this picture are the wizard, and we say something like the iconic wizard looks up at a gallery of different portraits of himself. Some of them might be demons or in various different outfits. They represent alternate versions of himself or something like that. And then art says, oh, wow, they represent alternate versions of themselves. That's really unnecessary for the artist to know to draw their picture. Why did design put in like that particular line? And they find the ones that are the right ones that the artists need to know what to draw. Then they take that part and send that to the artist, and then we get back an amazing picture. That's sort of how that process works.
Another couple of standout pieces of art from this chapter. I really like Kid Ezran. Not Kid Ezran, sorry, Kid Valoros.
Kid Valoros.
On page 195, and you can tell it's him because he's already got the scar over his nose.
So we tried to order Kid Valoros over the course of Pathfinder many times. For instance, in the background section of the core rulebook. This is the first one where I feel like we've succeeded at ordering Kid Valoros, and it's really definitely Kid Valoros. Whereas the background is a great piece of art, but I'm not sure anyone knew that was Valoros.
I just opened the PDF and I'm quickly checking what that Valoros looks like compared to this Valoros. Because I think even before I noticed the scar, I was like, this is Valoros, isn't it?
Yeah, like these artists we have and our team are just amazing, and somehow they can just give you that feeling, even though it wasn't just a carbon copy of Valoros that was sent down and didn't look like a child. Like, it really looks like a younger version of Valoros that's different, but you can tell who it is. It's awesome.
Yeah, I can't tell in the core rulebook which character is supposed to be a young Valoros in the background section.
Yep. See? That's what I said.
In this... Oh, go ahead, Parm.
One of my favorite pieces of art is just a few pages earlier than that, at 176. It was, and I really hate to say this, but I was like, oh, it's the vehicle section. Why am I going to be excited about the vehicle section? Turn the page. Oh, this art piece is why I want to be excited about the vehicle section. Because I thought it was just going to be boats.
No. Even the first edition Ultimate Combat Vehicle section had carriages and carts and whatnot.
But did it have a steam giant?
Maybe?
Yeah, I don't remember that very much. I will admit, I never used the vehicle segment of Ultimate Combat. My apologies.
Vanessa famously used the airship one time.
Oh.
Also, there's a fun vehicles-y thing in the opener for that chapter on page 146, where they're in a skyship that's blowing up while Valoros is fighting, and a
Hobgoblin?
and a very windswept Lem is like, I'm gonna keep this ship in the sky.
And that is not the only on board some kind of vessel image in this section. There is also the one where we've got the pirate-looking iconics, including Drugami is the name of the...
Yeah, Drugami.
Yeah, Drugami with an eye patch.
Friend, Drugami.
I was also going to call out the Sione as a dual class PC, just because I like how the color palette kind of clashes with itself, which seems like intentional and purposeful for when you're talking about some kind of caster martial class character. If it's not, I'm sorry to the artist, but I believe that's what they were going for.
It's strikingly different, but as an ensemble, I feel like it fits, and you can really tell that she's a champion of Pharasma, a Redeemer champion of Pharasma, in addition to her usual sorcererness.
All right, I think we'll probably come across some more pieces of art that we enjoy. Oh, no, sorry. There was one that we talked about before the show, one of the many Mauricial pieces on page 30. This one needs to be called out before we start going page by page.
That's right. I ordered
this
that
is
one
in
too.
the resolving problems section, and without even explaining it, you've got Mauricio leaving with the iconic pieces of equipment from the various different iconics, and she is so pleased with herself.
She's just happy. She's supposed to be a problem player, but she's just so gleeful. You almost want to be like, "Oh, it's okay. You stole everything that off of the backs of all the other iconics."
Yeah. Like she even stole Valeros's mug. She just did that to be cool.
Yep.
Hold on, you're making an assumption that she stole this? Look what section is immediately to her right.
Oh, total party kill.
I'm
Would
just
be the
gonna
first time that the rogue's the
tell
only
you
one who
from
made
the
it out
art
alive.
order. She did steal all of it. So.
Okay,
Would she really be this happy if everyone was dead?
I mean,
that's
everyone
probably
but
worse.
Kira?
Look at all the consolation prizes she got.
Yeah, so there's some fun art in here. We're definitely seeing a couple of different styles than we're used to seeing in your all's books. There's some more blocky pastel art, especially in the later part of it. And thank goodness, a whole lot of eyes, what the PCs would see of really interesting locations instead of top-down shots of really interesting locations.
Yeah, I really like those two sort of vistas. They spark my imagination a lot.
Oh, and I do want to call it a Vista because when we start going page by page now, because it's the very first one, it was the first piece of art that I was like, ooh, I want to go there. And that is the Lenny and the volcano picture with the dinosaurs.
Yeah, all the pterosaurs flying around.
Oh, what page is that on?
4.
Page 4, it's the very first thing you see after the table of contents.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah. I liked it because like it's a kind of a restful pause moment, and there's not often a lot of art like that.
And plus, like, it is clearly a dangerous place. Like, there's dinosaurs very nearby, but it's also a beautiful place, and that's something that GMs might not always think to remind their players that they are on an adventure. This is a cool chance to explore what the world is outside of their limits.
Yeah, it's really easy to forget that the world doesn't exist on 5x5 squares drawn out in bad magic marker. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The introduction to this book, a 2-page spread. Actually, it goes to, no, it is just a 2-page spread.
Yep, 2-page.
Yep. And I actually think it kind of undersells the book because it doesn't really go into a lot of the mechanics that come later on. It talks more about the GM tools and GM advice sections of this book, which is a major part of it, but it's also the expected part of it. And I think, Param, you were talking about your surprise. I suspect your surprise was a lot based on the latter half of this book.
In both, actually.
Okay.
I was surprised at the specificity. When we get to the chapter called Game Mastery Basics, I kind of expected that I would very quickly flip through those pages, after, just note what's in there and flip through them, because I have read so many of these books before. But what I really like is that it spends a lot of time talking about very specific issues of running a second edition game and the new rule systems and how you're going to handle those, as well as some more modern thinking and some more modern solutions to a lot of problems that these books present. I mean, it introduces concepts that we've adopted as a culture, like lines and veils and X cards and session 0, and it's the first time I've seen those sort of things in a game master book from the big publishers.
I don't really think it's your fault that the name Game Mastery Basics misled you into what you expected to find there. It's not really a chapter about Game Mastery Basics. It's actually more of advanced game mastering because the basics are in the core rule book. It has advice, but also just concrete stuff like a table of treasure by encounter, if you want to do it by encounter, not by level. That is something that any GM can use. Whereas Game Mastery Basics, I feel like makes it sound like it's just for that starting off GM, and that other people skip those first 50 pages, which I think undersells the book and is a mistake for the person reading it to skip.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like that very basic information that I expected this is really just through page 9, and then from that point forward, it kind of dives directly into, okay, this is how we change the game. This is the stuff you're going to need to know to run it, and if you want it to run a different way or the old way, this is how you start adapting it. And lots of good advice about very specific questions that we've had on this same podcast before. You know, how are we going to handle this? How would we do that? Why was this the decision it went with? A lot of those answers are in this book.
Well, we were watching what people were asking about, and ultimately, like, and we're still sort of talking about the introduction to the whole book, but ultimately that first chapter wound up being like a best guess of things that Logan and I had seen that people wanted to have qualified or clarified in certain ways or expanded upon. Like in the core, we say, do some events when you run downtime, figure it out. But people wanted to know, what events should I do? So there are events for you to do in downtime, for example. I feel like the introduction for the book, what we were trying to do there, and it may have actually, like Ryan said, it may have made it so it was, it could be that we didn't succeed in this, is that we wanted to say, hey, who are you? What is your deal? Have you been GMing for a really long time? All sorts of editions? Are you brand new? And then we have the choosing your tools section that sort of tells you, these are some sections that are even really going to speak directly to you. Are you using adventure paths? Oh, well, better make sure to look at this section. Well, it's really true that anybody can make use of all 5 of the sections.
I also like that the introduction kind of sets the tone for the book, like literally the word choice, because a lot of the language is it's permissive. It's not like telling me this is how you do it. It's these are the ways to do it. These are the things to think about when you're GMing. And it leaves it up to me to know, like, are these things that I have to worry about at my table, and what are some options for resolving them?
Ryan, you've nailed it really with what we're trying to do is try to make it a toolbox. On like the second chapter, they've been called tools. A box of tools, a sort of teach a GM to fish rather than just hand you out some fish. We'll see it when we move into subsystems. We start by dissecting what is a subsystem, how do we build subsystems, how can you build your own, and here's some examples, and you'll see that we used the same framework that we talked about there. So that is very much part of our answer to that question I posed at the beginning, is how do we make a book that feels like it's not I'm being forced to buy it to play the game, but that it's essential still and completes the set and is really useful, is by empowering you rather than just giving you some things.
It's also really easy to follow because you've got a lot of references back and forth to pages, and you've got a lot of, like, the categories are very clear, and it also refers back to where you'll find this information in the core rulebook before expanding on new information. So it was textbook-like in that way, except it's a much more enjoyable read than you might think of for textbooks. It's a very just useful reference guide.
I think you underestimate Introduction to Advanced Biology.
How entertaining that is.
Indeed. I mean, if we had Lauren here, she would, tell us endlessly how awesome those books are.
Oh, but she would just talk about it related to fish.
Right. The cool ones.
So, Mark, if you could rename chapter 1, what do you think you would rename it?
Advice, probably, since it's more like advanced game mastering than basic, but it's not exactly either of those. So it's just like this advice on how to make your game the best that it can be. So advice. That is what it used to be called when we were going through the book.
So I think one of the things that right on the first page that stands out to me is that you've got the pacing game sessions. You get a couple of paragraphs about that, and then when you get to encounters, running encounters, it goes into that a little bit more too. That is the kind of thing that it clearly shows this is not basics. This is the kind of thing that it's a little more of the art of GMing. It's the thing that you could read about GMing all you want, but until you've really gotten to the table, you don't understand the need for pace and for more storytelling elements of the job.
Right. This is the introduction to that first chapter now, and the part that Perrin was saying is really the most basic thing that's in the chapter, and that much is true. But you're right that we put more storytelling, improvisation, and additional rules to help supplement what are the actual basics in the core rulebook on these same topics. A lot of these topics, the core rulebook had a little, we give you a little more in the intro. We give you a lot more of what you need for specific topics once you get past the intro.
I also like that this section reads like it is a book for RPGs based on knowledge gained from the decades we've had RPGs, when all too often sections like this in books, like the very basic advice, is kind of just regurgitating the same stuff we've been reading since Uncle Figgy's Guide. And the fact that this is like acknowledging like, oh, we have since learned that doing this is a bad idea. Like betrayal NPCs can often make your game unfun for the rest of the game unless you do it right. Or, hey, when you're going to improvise, here's some advice on how to improvise so you don't break everything. And the concept of failing forward was totally not a thing in previous editions, where a lot of those books read adversarially, DM versus players.
If you didn't use your 10-foot pole, that was it.
I think so. In the hero point section, there's the sentence: "The toughest part of awarding hero points can be remembering to do it."
Yes,
that really felt like you were speaking to me directly.
Me too.
Yeah.
No, I just did the finale for my War for the Crown game on Saturday, and just partway through, when I was like, "You could use a hero point," to Linda, and she's like, "I already spent mine." I was like, "Yeah, I probably should have awarded at least one, given how gonzo the stuff you guys just did was. Everyone take one, and you can spend it now." I am the worst at awarding hero points.
Yeah. I've been trying to make sure that I award them a lot more liberally now, because even in Pathfinder Society, it got so bad because we're supposed to start using them in Society that they started writing in the adventures about the fifth one in. It's like, here's a good point to hand out a hero point, because a lot of my GMs just weren't used to it, weren't remembering it, and would go whole sessions. But the game is balanced around you having these things.
Yeah, I mean, my group usually doesn't need them, which is part of why I forget about them, but it's still more fun if you have them and you get that little bit more sort of impact that you as a player can throw into the things that matter most for you.
There is a thing I do that has helped a little bit, and also kind of helps me from falling into the trap of just giving the same people that are super charismatic all the hero points. Is I have started, however many players there are in the game, I cut that number in half, round up, and put a stack of those hero points in the middle, and I say, award these to each other when you think they did something awesome.
Cool.
That's neat. That sort of fits into one of the topics in this chapter, which is, let me make sure I get the name of the topic correctly, narrative collaboration, where you can sort of farm out some of the what's typically considered the role of the GM to some of the players and change your game up in that way.
Yeah, when I saw this section's title, I was like, no, they didn't put that in the Pathfinder book, did they? And then they did, and it's good advice. It's a good, this is stuff we've really only seen in a lot of indie RPGs or smaller games, and even then, only recently, some of this stuff. And the idea that the lessons learned and the cool concepts of more group storytelling could be used in a game that is still at its deepest roots, the oldest game in the industry.
I don't know how much of Logan's CV you know, but he has deep roots in the indie RPG community and has done a lot of work there. So he's always excited about ways that we can get in like components that work well for that, but that in a way that will work well for our game. And that is an example. Narrative collaboration is something that Logan pitched, let's get it in the book, and we were all like, this is awesome. So now it's here.
And specifically, I'm really strongly considering for my non-adventure path volumes, because the adventure paths can be kind of derailed if they ask for certain things. But for my more improvised games, or my story of the week adventure games, implementing the story point system, where players get a certain number of points, where they're just allowed to take the narrative hat for a bit.
So I feel like I've got somewhere between a lot to say or not much more to say about the first chapter. I think basically to sum it up is that I never felt like I was just reading the same thing that I've read 100 times before. It really felt like every couple of paragraphs, something would surprise me. There would be a very modern take, and I really appreciated this first chapter. I'm not like, I would not call myself someone who needs the GM basics, but the advice that I read was really appreciated.
Yeah. And before we leave this chapter, there are two sections that I think especially need to be called out and applauded. And one is page 35, Rarity in Your Game, where it explains in much better, not better, but much greater detail how to use the rarity system for the game, and why you would want to do it, and how to use it to enhance the game, since this is something new. This is something we're not used to dealing with, and it was definitely one of the elements that a whole lot of us were unsure about our opinions on the game as a whole, depending on how we interpreted the rarity system. Like, and since it says sentences like uncommons, the PC should be able to get them if they try hard enough. So that puts it as an agency thing where you're supposed to allow them to go for that stuff. And where, as opposed to some of the earlier interpretations of, well, if you didn't pick this as a character background, or you didn't build your character exactly like this, or your GM didn't run this specific campaign, it means it's banned, which is definitely a much more harsher interpretation of the rarity system.
Rarity is meant to help you sort of figure out what is the common baseline and then make your character special because of choices you made in character building and in play. And also choices the GM might have made for the world that are different than normal, and change the rarities if you want. So it's why your character who played Fall Plaguestone has a unique, spoilers, but a unique something that you can get from that adventure that nobody else has except for people who played Fall of Plaguestone.
Lore?
It is a unique X. There's only one thing that's unique that you can get in there, but I won't reveal that here because people are probably going to play Fall of Plaguestone. I think rarity is super important, and that's good to cover it. If we're going to head out of chapter 1, I'll give a few more quick notes. One is there's a section for encounters, exploration, and downtime. Each one of them contains advice and questions that people had been asking about those three types of play. Like when Logan was scoping out some of those sections, he and I brainstormed and were like, what are things that people are having trouble with that they probably want to know about? And we had several months of people having trouble with things before we really had to lock this part down. So you guys, if you were online or you were talking to us and telling us, you may have helped shape this section in one of those three subsections. Then I would say...
Oh, actually, before you move on from that, when we were reviewing the core rulebook, one of the, I would say the strangest surprise was that downtime only got a single page. Like I was really expecting a lot more information there. So the fact that downtime really gets just fleshed out, not that it has more rules, but just sets better expectations of what to do with downtime, how to make it engaging and fun for everyone at the table. That was very much appreciated.
Yeah. What's a weird thing that can happen as an event while you're retraining? Maybe you tap into new magical powers. Maybe someone sees you retraining, asks to join.
Or just your trainer doesn't show up one day. Like, it was written very much like, this is not just the roll the die and say a week has passed. This is an opportunity for very character-driven stories to be told.
And the core rulebook intimates that you should do that every once in a while, but it didn't have space to tell you what kinds of things to put in there.
Yeah, when I was reading that, I was reminded of, I don't know if any of you have played the newest Fire Emblem game for the Nintendo Switch, the Three
Houses?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So in it...
Fish all the time.
Yes, fish all the time. In it, you're
a lot of fish references this episode.
In it, you are a teacher in a adventurer school for the first half of the game, and you have to teach students, and there's definitely training and downtime that happens as part of the structure of that game. And then every so often, random events would happen where you would have character on character, flavorful events and funny moments and just weird situations that happen in our day-to-day lives. And basically, like, oh, this is like a visual novel, is what it is. I have to run my games like a visual novel.
Yeah. That's one way to do it. Like, there's all sorts of ways you can go about downtime, but it wasn't just one page in the core, because there's playing and running downtime sections in the core, but it definitely is not as much space as we would have liked to give if we had more space. And here we do, to give some more information. Let's see, what are the other big ones to look at?
Well,
Certainly.
There's one. There was the one that was really impressed by, and I know I'm going to come back here when I'm starting to do adventure design, and that is in the adventure design section. I'm not talking about the whole section, but there's one particularly brilliant piece of data in here, and that is your adventure recipes, where you give some advice on like how many sessions should a dungeon crawl last, what kind of encounters, and like it even breaks it down into like, well, here's like a very specific, recipe, which is why you guys named it this. Have, 2 trivial encounters, 4 low encounters, 6 moderates, and 6 severes, and then like advice on where to place them, and like have enemy tropes. And it's just a cool little, reading this will at least get you jogging in the right direction and thinking of the questions you need to be asking to prepare those sorts of adventures and how they would be different from the other adventures. I think every GM, no matter how experienced they think they are, needs to read every one of those.
Yeah, you caught the next thing that I was going to say too. This is no, it's good. It means that I was picking things that were not just arbitrary, but were also the ones that stood out to you. But at this section, the adventure recipes is just something very early in the brainstorm that Logan pitched. And then at first nobody knew what it was, and when he explained it, we were all like, "Yes, we need these for this book." And this is also the section where Owen contributed. He gave a few of the adventure recipes as well. A lot of this advice section was written by Logan or me, but this section was a collab, and Logan wrote out some of the adventure seeds, and then Owen finished off the rest, and we mixed it all up. And yes, this was one of the other highlights I didn't want anyone to miss before finishing the chapter.
And speaking of collaborating with us right now, you can do so in our live Twitch chat. Yes, we film these episodes live every Wednesday at 9 o'clock p.m. And if you'll get on the Twitch chat, you can ask us or our guests questions throughout the episodes. We collect them, and we try to slip in as many as we can. It's a rather busy day today in the chat, but come on, gang, if you've got questions for us or for Mark or anything about this book, or a little later when we start talking about another book, let us know so we can answer those questions right away.
Mark, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Page 27, this list of NPCs, the teachers, the sample teachers for downtime. Who came up with that list? I love every single one of those NPCs.
That would be Logan.
Logan should name all NPCs going forward.
All right. There you go then. Those 3 sections that were advice for the 3 modes of playing were sections that Logan wrote all of them, and then I did a design pass on them. So Logan came up with them. They were awesome. And I have one more highlight from this chapter that I want to make sure we don't miss before we go through, which is in the encounter design. It's something that definitely, the dynamic encounter section in particular, is definitely not Game Mastery basics, because it even says, don't do this all the time. This is for more advanced encounters. But it takes the encounter design from the core rulebook, and it really amps it up and shows you how to up your game with evolving battlefields, time pressure, secondary objectives, and more. So that is a way, other than just adding numbers to your enemies, that you can make your encounters more interesting and sort of take a little pressure off of your enemies so they get more turns to do something before the players kill them. And that section is by Linda.
Oh, nice.
Ooh. I was really excited when we heard that Linda was joining the crew.
So a lot of the advice, what I like about the format is that it really drives home, like, here's a cool idea, use it sparingly. Otherwise, it will become a little too routine, and then just the routine becomes boring. So also, I like that it called out, like, every now and then throw a really insignificant encounter at your PCs just to make them feel good about themselves, to remind them they're awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I also like that it's kind of no wishy-washy advice in here. It's none of those we want to respect all possible interpretations of how a game should be run. Whoever wrote this advice believes in this advice and says it very succinctly, says it very convincingly, and with some trust that it indeed works, as opposed to the exact opposite of those devices.
Well, I guess it helps that you have two of the authors of the game system in general that have a strong belief in the system and the fact that it works. But also, I think that just like that concise and direct writing that is easy to understand is a hallmark of some of Logan's style when he's sort of talking to you, and you can still see that after my design pass, after the editing passes on a lot of the sections, because he did a fair amount of work in that chapter.
All right, I will call out one piece of advice that I was like, oh, that would not work for me. And that was that if you've got a player that's hoarding their gold, maybe give them something, motivate them with like a charity or something to make them spend it. And I was just thinking of Kathy, who basically treats her gold like her victory points, but she would donate to that charity if I, as her GM, put it in front of her, and she would hate me for it, and she would hate the charity as she's giving her gold over.
Oh man, it's become a.
But that's. Oh, go ahead.
That has become a trope in our games ever since when our group got together playing Pathfinder First Edition, and the cleric won a big old bunch of gold and was like, I give it to the church, and then everybody was like screaming no, and one of our players got up behind him and reenacted it in slow motion. I give it to the church. And ever since then, our characters just continue to donate in honor of that event almost all their gold.
That's hilarious.
I want to call out page 53 for being a very realistic example of what your map might look like. And also, the map symbols at the bottom are useful because I keep getting tired of my players asking, why is that room full of toilet seats?
So the drawing map section...
No, go ahead, Mark.
The drawing map section is one of the sections that, if you know a lot about our flip mats and how that's something that since time immemorial Stephen has designed, this is one of the sections Stephen made sure he worked on before he left, which was early in the Gamemastery guide. And so, Stephen really wanted a hand-drawn map that looked like one that you had drawn, rather than just like, this has obviously just been graphic designed and is super professional, and this is not like anything I have done, because this gives more of the feel of, oh yeah, this is what it could look like.
Mm-hmm. And if you are interested in hearing more about how much Stephen loves maps, go back to a late or mid last year episode where we interview Stephen about the flip tiles and map packs and designing maps and all about his love of maps.
I'm guessing episode 195, and now I'm going to look it up.
Ooh.
Steven still does the flip mats, and he's gone from Paizo. Really? That's how much he loves the maps.
I'm glad, because I like the flip maps, and when he introduced the flip tiles in the standardized 6x6 format, I was like, hallelujah!
Steven knows those flip mats so well, and he always puts in like the little... not quite Easter eggs, but it's like, oh, this map would fit against this other map. If you have them all, you can combine it into some kind of special map.
They together form Voltron.
That's right. Defender of the mapverse.
Are we ready to move on to tools?
This is when it gets fun.
All right. So this is a lot of what I was saying about how it feels like the game is now complete, because a lot of these tools are the kind of things that as a GM I feel like I absolutely need before I can really dive into an adventure. And it starts with a section that we were pretty familiar with because it was released early, and that is the building creatures, building NPCs, and building hazards section. So, Mark, I believe this was more Logan's section, but what were some of the goals for building creatures, building hazards, building NPCs?
I mean, we worked on it together very collaboratively. Logan did take the first stab at writing everything down. So yeah, I would say it's a little more Logan section, but I can definitely tell you about the concept, which is that we wanted to building monsters to be top down. And I'll explain that because not everyone's in computer science and knows about top down versus bottom up approach in designing things. So a top down approach means you start with the big picture and what you want to get out of something, and you work down towards the details. Bottom up means you start with all the little details and it comes together into the whole at the end. Pathfinder First Edition is a bottom up approach. It doesn't matter what you want your battle ready Fey to be in Pathfinder First Edition. You have to put on those Fey hit dice that don't give you much base attack bonus and find out what happened when you did that, and possibly go back and readjust when you find out that what you got to at the top is not what you were hoping for. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, we just really tried to make it so that you had the flexibility, the tools, and the power to think of what you wanted, that really cool Fey warrior, for example. Start with that concept and work down. Still having plenty of numbers and tables to help you figure out where to go from there so you don't get lost, which is one of the problems some top-down approaches have, where they're like, create a concept, now do it. We're not going to necessarily help you, but hopefully you match the concept. So we wanted to have just as much structure as necessary, but in the opposite direction, so you always get what you want, essentially. And that is the main goal. There are a lot of side goals, but that is the main goal of this section compared to Monster Christian in Pathfinder First Edition.
I can tell you that was one of my main issues with the switch over to top down, was that anytime I felt like making a monster, I felt like I was kind of flailing in the air. And so to have basically the steps to go, the order I should be doing it, like a lot of what I like about the bottom up approach was it controlled my attention span. So instead of just being like, oh, and here's an idea to throw it in, and now it's like, oh, where was I? What was I doing? And just feeling like I never got past step one. No, the charts are exactly what I need to make up for that. And yeah, I feel a lot more guided through the process. So even though broadly you can say yeah, you just make whatever monster you want, that's terrifying to me. But saying make any monster you want following these steps, I'm like, thank you.
And since it's top down, we can give a lot more of sort of advice about how to use that table and why to use certain things and why to change certain things in certain combinations. We can say, hey, if you up both the attack bonus and the damage, that's going to be more than the sum of its parts for that creature. Whereas if it's bottom up, it's more that strength boost that you gave it and the full base attack magical beast hit dice, that's going to give you more of everything, whether you want it or not. You may have to readjust somewhere else to make up for it.
I also there's a couple of times where you said strength and damage is usually the exception. So it's these are the hard limits, except when you're talking about this, and you didn't really spend much time justifying it, which seems perfectly fine. It's just not all ability scores are created equal. The game is pretty dependent on strength for some very specific needs. So just kind of, if this is the one area that your build is off, that's the area you're allowed to be off.
Yeah, strength in particular as a modifier is allowed to go higher, not even necessarily because it has to, but just because really any of them can go higher, but you need a real strong justification. But it turns out being Godzilla size is a really strong justification for having strength that's higher than, and there's a lot of monsters that do things like that, so it's the most common. But if you're a nymph or a succubus and you want to go into the extreme for your charisma ability score because you're world class for your level, go ahead. But yeah, damage, the reason why we say damage is one that you want to make sure your dice kind of look like something that feels similar to damaged PCs are rolling, unlike any of the other stats, is empirical from actually the playtest, where people just, even if rolling 3d6 and rolling 2d10 is very similar in what you get. When the monster's rolling 3d6 and people are like, where did that third die come from? Having an extra die matters. And it feels like it matters, and it feels like you deserve to get it from somewhere special. Especially since normally that's from a striking rune or something like that in the game. And so we quickly realized that giving a lot of extra dice to make the monster's damage come up was just felt off and wrong to a lot of people, whereas if they have an extra bonus that's more than their strength, hey, you know what? PCs have weapon specialization, right? There's other things that go into that. It feels like they could, as a monster, have that extra. So it's the one place where you kind of look a little closer just for feels purposes, whereas in all the other ones, it's just you can just pick off the table. It's not going to matter that much because maybe they had legendary proficiency on that a little bit sooner.
Now, you're very familiar with these rules, I imagine, after having developed this and having made a ton of critters
That's
for
right.
2nd edition. Starfinder had a very simple, not a very simple, but a very similar kind of goal with its alien creation system. It definitely doesn't quite go into the granularity that this one presents. But as a Starfinder GM, I eventually got to the point where I knew that those tables and so well that I was literally improvising monsters and NPCs on the spot with accurate numbers. Is that something you see as possible with this monster system for a GM that gets familiar enough with it?
That's how I've done the last 3 books of War for the Crown. I just can make them on the spot instantly. So the evolution of those rules, and you're right, there was an evolution, is Pathfinder Unchained rules, which were written by, the main majority of the rules were written by Logan for Pathfinder Unchained as a freelancer writing the rules. And then there were also some additional rules in there by Rob Schwalb, I believe, wrote some of the rules as well. And then we put those out. Starfinder was heavily based on those, and they have these sort of little mini templates that are in them that make it a little bit less fully top down than the final system for PF2, but still it's very top down system to start off with. And then Pathfinder 2nd edition fully took out that last training wheel and made it entirely, here are all the rules that you need to figure this out, but we're going to give you the power of top down completely. And that's sort of how that went. So I would say if you ever reach the point where you could do it with Starfinder, it should be a little bit easier to reach that point in Pathfinder edition, 2nd edition, but not by much. They're both very good monster creation systems that can reach the point of instant improvisation in either of them.
Do you think you'll be improving monsters before long, Ryan?
That's an interesting question. Probably. But I'll reskin more than I'll just create something completely out of the blue.
Okay.
I highly recommend a spreadsheet for improving, like the one Logan made, a spreadsheet that you put in the level and it gives you all of the different statistics in extreme, high, moderate, low, etc. for that level. And then if you just change the level in that cell, it'll auto populate everything. And having that makes it so easy. I mean, it's still not trivial, right? You still have to figure out which combinations of things you want to use, but it's so easy to improvise with a tool like that.
And there's several good tools for Starfinder out there that have made web apps to run through the monster creation system. I am hopeful and sure that the Pathfinder 2 community can do just as well, and we will be flooded with a glorious glut of monster making apps.
I bet you're right.
There's a 2E monster making website that came up after the PDF was released to this section. Let me see if I can find it, because I was trying to use it when I was trying to make Cthulhu at one point.
Well, Steven from Roll for Combat seems with exclamation marks, Steven Glicker, and question marks to think that there will be something like that very soon.
Is that a question?
That's very strident.
I think that's a tease.
Yeah, that really sounds like a tease to me.
Considering Warlock found the one that I was talking about, Pathfinder 2e Monster Creator. It's at slanguage.github.io/pf2monsters.
That's cool. That's a different one than I was using. I was using a spreadsheet in Google Docs that was distributed on the Reddit.
All right. Well, there's lots of great tools already. Use them, and you will be able to improvise eventually. Obviously, not as quickly as one of the people who made the system and then the monster creation system. But I believe in you, viewer. Whoever you are, I think you can reach the point of quick, if not instant, improvisation.
So Mark, just a little side tangent. A lot of video game developers quickly talk about how quickly their players surpass their skill at their own games, even though they have been literally dedicating their lives to it for years. How long do you think it's going to take for the best of the Pathfinder players there to lap the design staff?
To lap the design staff in
System
which
mastery.
measures in system mastery? I think that in overall system mastery of just knowing everything that we've published, not very long. Right now, if you want to beat me, and you know every rule that was published in the back of Age of Ashes, and also every other book, but in particularly those, you beat me by those because Logan was on the design lead on those, and I didn't really see them that much. So, there's no one person who has seen everything. It's a minor convergence that I've seen everything other than that because I wound up taking Steven's projects when he left. And soon enough, there will be even more that I haven't seen. So when you're talking about system mastery of knowing everything that's out there, the people who know everything are already. And for anyone else on the design team, then conversely, if you know everything, you know more than that because I was on design lead on a bunch of projects.
Next up, we've got a couple of things on building items and intelligent items, which I don't think similar rules for building items and customizing items was ever released in first edition, or at least I guess because this is mundane and magical items combined. It's
first edition did have rules. They were just really problematic. They were in the back of the magic items. They were the ones that caused people to say, at will, True Strike that's just activated when I attack with my sword gives me plus 20 on all attack rolls. That looks like it's 2,000 gold pieces. But we skipped building hazards, but it's also it's also part of the hazard of monster creation rules. And NPCs in there too. They're a little more structured than a monster in some ways and have more specific roadmaps. But I don't think that there's much different to say about those, but it is notable that there is NPC and hazard creation rules too. Right?
That's true. And the non-combat level is worth calling out because in the monster creation rules, it's like, yeah, you'll have some social skills, but when you're determining the level, determine what it can do in combat. Whereas with NPCs, it's like, oh, you'll probably be besting them in a duel of wits if it's a civilized NPC. So consider this level for the PC or for the NPC when you're giving out experience for besting them because, yeah, they couldn't take a PC in combat, but they could take them in like a bake-off.
Right. And in Pathfinder First, we often saw like this character is like, it's a 10th level commoner who's really good at baking. How close are they even to the expected guideline of being an 8th level challenge? Because they're 2 levels lower than their level for a combat. They're not even remotely close to being an 8th level challenge for a combat. But the system had to say something about it, and it did it in that way. So what we wanted to do here was make it very clear. That level that's on there for a stat block is, are you fighting this person? It may be wildly inappropriate to fight that person, in which case, like you said, Ryan, it'll have a, hey, if you're in a courtroom and you have to best this judge or this lawyer, it might be level 6 challenge. But if you just are in a dark alley outside the courthouse saying to the lawyer, I'm going to kill you if you don't let my friend off for murder, they might only be a very easy challenge to defeat in combat because they're a lawyer. Although the judge could throw the book at you. You never know.
How much damage does the book do?
Let me check. Let me check under magistrates.
It does not have it, does it?
No,
yes. Oh no, they throw the gavel But there is someone who throws a book. The gavel does a D4, and I think somebody throws the book at you, and it's probably also a D4. The barrister throws the book at you. There you go.
Sorry, I got.
Back to building items.
Yeah,
sorry, we really digressed with the NPCs, but building items. There was a section on building items in Pathfinder First, but it was sort of like formula based. It's like, here's some formulas. We didn't actually follow these formulas most of the time, but hopefully you could follow them and get an item that works for your game. Here, it's less of that and more of a top-down. Again, what do you want to make? All right, think about what level that ability could be, benchmark it based off spells and a few other things. Here's how much it should cost once you figure it out that way. It breaks up the problem of figuring out like what the heck power level is this item into 2 steps, making it easier than when you just only had a price that you could use to express what the item was.
And then after intelligence items, we've got cursed items, and that's kind of where we're transitioning from straight advice to some more actual some crunch that GMs can use in their games, because you've got the specific cursed items. Starting with
intelligent items has a few of those too, and quirks are pretty crunchy. Luis wrote some funny quirks in there. But I think there's 3 specific intelligence items you can use in your games in the intelligent items section.
Yeah, Genius Diadem, the Martyr's Shield, and the Singing Sword.
They're all hilarious.
Diadem?
Yeah, Genius Diadem is an int headband that thinks it is smarter than you because it is smarter than you. The Martyr's Shield is a shield of a martyr who died, and that shield itself may be a little more willing to protect your allies than you are. And the Singing Sword that really wants to sing whether you want it to sing or not.
Oh, it's only
when
5th
do you
level.
want it to sing?
That's going to find its way into a dungeon soon.
So, cursed items, any of them that stand out to you?
Bag of Weasels. That was originally from Jason Bowman's Glass Cannon game, and Eleanor decided, let's put it in. Eleanor was our freelancer for the cursed items section. So the Bag of Weasels is anytime it's like a bag of holding, except anytime you try to pull an item out of the bag, there's like a 50% chance it was transformed into a weasel. And it might escape, and then you have to like catch it to get your item back, because it's not just a weasel you pulled out. It was your item that was turned into a weasel.
I like that. I like the origin of that it came from the Glass Cannon live game. I remember, like, I'd forgotten that was actually in that game, but then you mentioned it. I remember. And then
in addition to the specific cursed items, Eleanor also gave us some like curses that are sort of almost like the flip side to runes. They're like just a bad thing you put onto some other item. It's like, oh, well, I thought my magic ring was cool, but it's actually an arsonist ring that now whenever I activate it, a random ally takes persistent fire damage.
Oh, my favorite.
That's okay, right?
My favorite is Dreary. It's a 3rd level curse. When you put the item on and invest in it, a literal rain cloud appears over your head and rains on you for the rest of the day.
Yep. It extinguishes flames. It can help you maybe, but cold conditions are bad. It's kind of miserable, and it might interfere with your sleep.
And I liked overdramatic. On a critical hit, you are blinded by the brilliance of this blade.
Oh, I'm so surprised, Ryan. You liked overdramatic. What about grandstanding?
I'm reading into what you've just said.
They just seem like something that you would love to ham out as a player. But that's the one where when you reduce a foe to 0 hit points, you then like gloat and pose and do some weird, fun roleplay stuff, and it wastes the rest of your turn. I don't know. I could imagine the characters I've seen you play with me definitely using the grandstanding curse and being amused by it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's hardly a curse at all. And then we've got Relics. Relics is a concept that I really like. It was introduced later into 1st edition, and it, like a lot of things we're going to be talking about over the next couple of chapters, it's nice to see it introduced so early into second edition because it's a core feeling option that came later in the original game.
I mean,
its history is fascinating.
Oh,
go on.
We want to hear this history.
Okay. So I will tell you the history, which is that the first time that there was an idea that to do relics that look like this was something that Jason Bowman really wanted to put into the Pathfinder playtest. This will help you understand the timing of just how weirdly timed everything and how far in advance we have to work. Very early on, he's like, this is cool. It's something cool and different that we've never done before. Let's just have it be in the core of the game. But it was super long. It was very complicated. And his early system is very similar to what we wound up with in the end. But it was like we didn't have time to complete it. It would have made the book a lot longer. But while this was happening, people were like, there's a relic system. And so like that's why Logan wound up writing the relic article for War for the Crown, is that he was one of the people who knew what the heck we were doing with relics at the time. Our best guess for the playtest. Didn't make it into the playtest, but we still have Jason's doc. Didn't make it into the core rules, which also Jason was like, can we fit it? We couldn't. So Jason's like, okay. And we're like, Jason, we'll try to get it into the Game Mastery Guide. And so we did. And Logan expanded out somewhat. We had James Case fill in some of the last relic seeds that is it seeds or is it the sort of the sections of gifts, some of those themes of gifts. And then I did a design pass on it and boom, relics. So it's interesting you talk about it's like, oh, it took us so long to get it into first edition. It's great to see it so early in second edition. We basically saw it all mostly because of continual attempts to put it into second edition as soon as possible.
Very cool.
I remember asking, and being a pretty common request on both the boards and in panels, back even when you all were talking about the first Advanced Player's Guide, the players asking for a leveling magic item system, and the teams saying like, oh, we're thinking about something, we're trying something. I mean, I am appreciative that this was going back to the Pathfinder playtest, but when you first said that sentence, I thought you meant Pathfinder beta, and I would have believed it.
Oh, well, I mean, Pathfinder Unchained has magic items that advance with you. And I should give credit to that, and there are a lot of other ideas, but if we're specifically saying relics that are almost exactly the same as this that also showed up in PF1, it is interesting because the PF2 version of it is actually what led into that. It's sort of like how people are like, oh, Pathfinder 2nd Edition used the Starfinder ability level ups at level 5, 10, 15, and 20, but actually it was that whole ability score system is what we had at the time before ABCs, and Starfinder used that. But then we kept iterating, and then we wound up with the advancement system being exactly the same, but the starting system being different. So it is still a relationship, but the familial relationship is different than it seems based on the publication dates. And that's the same for the relics, too.
That does line up your long-standing theory that the sci-fi RPGs are only introduced to playtest the next version of the fantasy RPG.
But that's also different because there was a time when we were definitely making Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but we're not sure that we were making Starfinder. So. Oh, wow. It was not introduced for that reason, but it was still able to take good ideas that we had up until that point. No, it was not created just to, or even partially to playtest ideas for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It was created because it's cool, and it's its own game, and it took some cool innovations that we were working on for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but it's its own deal.
After relics, we've got artifacts. So I was going to say, what's the difference between a relic and an artifact? But no, the rules are self-explanatory, that relics level up with you and they grant different powers based on the adventures you're going on, whereas artifacts are just so awesome. They're more awesome than magic items. Would you agree?
They're pretty awesome. And that's why we had to get noted fan of putting awesome things in Luis Loza to put in some of these artifacts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're on this Friday. We're gonna have me and Luis talking about this item section on Pathfinder Friday because he did the quirks and the artifacts.
We have a question from Kitsune Warlock, Dustin, our very own Dustin. When you use a weapon, relic, or artifact in your game, do you adjust it to fit the party's preferred weapon, or prefer to see your players adjust their characters to use the new type of weapon, or play it by ear? So it's not a rules clarification, it's more of a stylistic implementation.
Mm-hmm.
How would you run relics like that, Mark?
Well, in Pathfinder First Edition, we almost sort of had to change some of the items because you had to be so over-specialized in one specific type of weapon that Cerithiel, one of the artifacts in this section, was dropped to Linda's character, and since it was not literally exactly a greatsword, she could not use it without massive penalties. So it changed into a greatsword. Another way I handled it is for like relics from Jade, not relics, but the special swords from Jade Regent that has to be a katana. It granted a bunch of katana stuff automatically that was up to the maximum of all the feats that they had in whatever their other weapon was for free. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, unless it's a fighter, you pretty much don't have to change it. And even if it's a fighter, they get the whole weapon group. So you can either not change it or very easily just say, you get the weapon group of swords plus this one axe as your group fighter. And there's not a lot of other massive investment like in PF1 where you could have literally 7 feats that turn off if you're not using exactly the Kusarigama and no other weapon. So that's my answer for that.
He says he likes that very much. Thank you.
Oh, cool.
My strategy is to do a bit of both, at least from the GM advice section. I try to make sure that every player gets some sort of magic item that they're going to be happy with, and then I also throw in the weirdest magic items I can think of so that they have toys to play with that they didn't expect. And it is always fun when I see a character completely retrain their character to use a new toy.
Yeah, so retraining. I forgot about retraining. That is another really solid way to handle it.
I ran a Weapons of Legacy campaign in 3.5, and I basically had the players know where a lot of these Weapons of Legacy were. Weapons of Legacy being similar in a lot of ways to Relics, but with clunkier implementation.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
No, but anyway, it was a cool enough concept that I based a whole campaign around it, and so I kind of gave them a catalog of this is the places you suspect to find these weapons, and then let them decide which ones were of interest to them.
That's
so basically,
cool.
they still had say over which ones they would eventually be getting, and they could start building their characters towards the things that they would eventually get. Oh, side question that can be answered in here: does Katie not participate in Twitch channel points? Yeah, we'll get to that later. That's from Darren Caldwell.
Yeah.
After artifacts, we've got the gem and art objects. This is like variant treasure. It's something that's always appreciated.
I know it's one that you would usually skip, but it also has some weird, interesting history that I can talk about.
I want to hear anything with interesting history.
Okay, so remember how Jason's sort of, I mean, it's not really white whale, but thing that kept not fitting into books was the relics. Steven's thing that kept not fitting into books was gem cutting. And like he had it very early on, like very in depth for the playtest and longer than even this. And we did not fit it into the playtest, and then we didn't fit it into the core. In fact, it was in such an early version of the rules, we had trouble finding it when we needed it for the Gamemastery guide, and we didn't have like Steven's copy because he was gone. But we found it, and we put in a simplified version of Steven's gem cutting system into here. And so that's sort of that, like, behind the scenes of the gems. For the art objects, I did that section, and I actually find that, like, for the amount of page that it took up, that took me the most effort of anything in this book. Because I didn't want it to just be the art objects from the first edition Gamemastery guide. But also, like, I wanted to make sure that I was not just randomly giving you something that should be worth way more than something else on the same chart. So I like looked up the relative values of various like semi-precious and non-precious metals and gems, and used the gems section on the left to try to make sure that like vaguely what I'm saying that you get is reasonable compared to the other things in its categories and the other categories. And that I didn't just repeat the same, like a flagon every time within the same category. So I spent way too much time on this, and I hope that people enjoy it, because I was not expecting to, given that I was, oh, it's just art objects, that's going to be fast.
Well, you know what? I appreciate that you're bringing it up, because it's not something I would have noticed, but I like what motivated the hard work.
I would not have noticed it either. It's something I would just roll on the table and take for granted, except for that I know I had to do that.
I've heard Owen talk about when he has to work on things like this is like, oh, you think it's easy, and the first 10 are. And
oh, if it's just a D100 chart of like weird ideas, then I mean, that's a lot, but I'm pretty good at that. Like Logan with those cool names, maybe not quite up to that caliber. But the fact that it couldn't just make up whatever I wanted, but also had these other constraints that I felt that I needed to make sure it was a reasonable lesser art object compared to the moderate and minor art objects, that's what really made it take a long time.
Well, you know what? I can picture PCs rolling twice on the chart, and one of them getting, like something that's supposed to be a lesser art object, one of them getting something that's supposed to be moderate. And if the moderate one feels cheaper than the lesser one, they will feel cheated. So again, that work that you put in, it's going to pay off in subtle ways.
Awesome. Next is Afflictions.
Yes, tell us about curses, drugs, and diseases.
That's a fun one because it is one of those straddling roles Liz sections, because Liz and her partner Landon wrote the Afflictions section as freelancers, and then after that, Liz joined the design team, and so I did a pass on Afflictions, and then we had Liz do the next design pass on Afflictions. It's like, here, take a look. Mark, is that a pass? You do a pass. So it was sort of like a way for her to tie together those two components and start like building up certain design skills, which I think is super cool. And it really shows like Liz and Landon's creativity, some of like the fun curses that they came up with for the curse section.
What are some highlights for you?
Well, let's see. There's a curse in there that is been a little while to remember each one. There's the thief's retribution, which when you steal something, you lose something more valuable every time. It's usually monetary, but it might be like your dear departed mother's ring that she gave you. Whoops. There's the one that you're hunted by undead creatures each night. They just come out and try to kill you. There's some just like basic ones that you kind of need, like you can never feel like you're not thirsty at any time. But also other interesting ones like losing your memories.
I do like that a lot of the ones in here would be very fun for the characters to play out, not just them to curse. I mean, they will curse it anyway, but they'll have a good time of it, whereas this could have very easily been, well, kind of what the next section is, Stage 4 Death.
The diseases, yeah. Oof. Those were definitely interesting, like looking up diseases. Like, I'm sure that my search history when looking up poisons to backstop Steven on the poison sections of the core rulebook has me on a watch list. Although, fortunately, there was a page of like how to poison your fictional character that probably less sketchy looking that I found when Googling about those. But some of these are real world diseases, and it sure did make sense for us to check to make sure that we did not claim that like malaria took an amount of time that was drastically different than the actual progression of malaria in real life. That being said, obviously it's a fantasy game. It's not exactly the same as malaria, but some of them are completely brand new, or you might recognize them from the horrific diseases from Horror Adventures that did very interesting and specific things. Some of those Liz and Lennon pulled back in, and we have in here. I think the brainworms were originally in that.
You got the Crimson Ooze disease too, which is your hand just starts turning into an ooze and then eventually makes you go insane and kills you.
You could cut off the hand. That's probably a good idea.
And this is a bit of a tangent, but something you said reminded me that Ryan Macklin told me he follows the Center for Disease Control on Twitter for like adventure ideas.
That's terrible.
I can completely believe that Ryan Macklin follows the Center for Disease Control for adventure ideas. And that is awesome.
After diseases, we get drugs, which starts with addiction as a disease, which I thought was a clever choice. Was there any hesitation on including drugs in the Game Mastery Guide?
So drugs have been enough of a part of Pathfinder, which even has the city of and nation of Katapesh with the name of the drug Pesh in its name, that there needed to be a discussion. So we felt that having a discussion, but making sure we had it on our terms is better than just not saying anything. And we had a sidebar about drugs in your game. We really looked from a game designer's perspective into the disease of addiction in a way that presented it with sensitivity and with, if not realism, because it's a game, some amount of respect to what it's like in the real world, where you can go cold turkey and you're going to be fine, but if you start using that drug again, your body has already learned certain pathways and you might go right back into a relapse. And the Pathfinder first addiction did not do that, but this version of addiction does that. And with a sidebar mentioning, hey, drug addiction can be something that really is a problem for certain players in your group that they dealt with or that's in their family. So be sure you know what you're doing and that you talk to people about how you're going to include drugs.
Sorry, I'm just looking something up. Param, can you take over for a second?
I just want to comment on that. It's actually that's one of the reasons I avoid ever dealing with the drugs, even though you guys have taken a bit of effort throughout the games to flesh them out, is because I do live in an area that has basically been economically and culturally devastated by the opioid epidemic. And it's just, nobody here likes to talk about drugs or has any sympathy for the drug problem because of how much damage it has basically done to the community and literally destroyed whole towns.
I am also a pretty drug reticent person myself, and so I wanted to make sure that we put in rules for these drugs, rules for things like alcohol, that recognize that some people want to tell themes about these in their games as bad things or however it's going to turn up, but also recognizing that we should not be glorifying certain aspects of drug abuse that can be devastating for people. So that's one thing that also Liz is really knowledgeable about presenting things in a really good way like that, which is why I was super glad to have her freelancing on this, and then as a designer to consult with back and forth during our 2 design passes about exactly how we would bring that up.
I am constantly amazed at all the things that Liz knows and can tell me in one of the most charismatic ways that usually has me laughing.
Liz is pretty great.
You know who else is really great?
Who?
You, Mark!
I knew
me?
It.
Yeah.
Oh,
so but we're kind of running on time. I want to definitely get to some of this later book and not be here for 3 hours, though we could.
Yeah, we are at about the halfway point of page count.
Yeah.
All right.
So I kind of want to move through the next section very quickly. So definitely stop us if there's
Yeah.
something you want to call
Well,
out
no,
here.
let's just say Building Worlds. Go watch Liz's Pathfinder Friday about Building Worlds.
Okay.
Because this was a section that was one of the last things in the book that had not been done. And Liz came in and she's like, "I'll do Building Worlds" as one of her first passes, where she just took the raw text from the freelancer and did a first design pass on it, and she did an amazing job, and talks about it in a previous Pathfinder Friday that can cover this topic far better than I could.
Yeah.
I did some stuff with the planes, and but really, honestly, not that much. So I think I'm ready almost to move on to subsystems because Liz has already covered Building Worlds.
Well, one thought I had about Building Worlds, it reminds me of the Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition World Builder's Guidebook by Richard Baker, which was one of my favorite books from 2nd edition because it was just so different from everything else that was out there. And so this is about a 12-page version of that same book with like a Pathfinder focus.
Yeah, it's a good section that will prompt you to think about things you might not think about when you are putting your cities, your nations, your planes of existence together. So it's definitely worth the read. But other than going through it, item by item, it's kind of hard to summarize. So definitely go check out the Pathfinder Fridays, like Mark says. But
yep. Also, if you read it very carefully, you can find the first reference to the only one of the legends in Pathfinder, in Lost Omens Legends, that has never been referenced before the Gamemastery Guide anywhere.
Interesting.
I won't say where, but it's in there somewhere.
And chat will find it in 5 seconds. Chapter 3,
shall see.
Subsystems, and it's the one with that boat crash.
Yes,
actually,
the boat.
Sorry. There was a question in chat from Darren Caldemeyer about settlements. How are the settlement rules in GMG, and do they allow for customization?
Well, basically, the one thing that we found out, because we did a giant panel with all the developers who had built tons of settlements with the first edition settlement rules, and we also read what people were saying online, which was that like all of those modifiers that settlement building rules had in Pathfinder First Edition, where like your law and your lore and your society are the thing that people use the least. Even Pathfinder Society, which normally uses the rules completely as written, definitely did not use them for certain settlements because it would make some of the adventures really impossible to have a -8 on a particular check. So we had a big mandate to not put those in because they were so easy to forget, but to instead put just some kind of a special rule that really made sense for that settlement, that may be unique to that settlement, as that's what the rule for the settlement is, and just give a lot of useful information for a GM or a player who reads the stat block to know, what is this settlement? How does it work? And that's how the settlement rules work.
So, subsystems, Param.
All right, so speaking of things that I recognize from
Param, you're muted.
Oh no.
Hello?
Yeah, now I can hear
Welcome back.
So speaking of things that I recognize from Pathfinder Society, the Subsystems chapter. A lot of these ideas we have been seeing in the latter half of Society. Obviously, we've been seeing some of this stuff in War for the Crown. If you are listening to Adventurous, you will recognize some of the things in this system that we were playing with back then. So I imagine that's when you all were testing some of these ideas out.
Well, sort of. They each have their own interesting history that I will not take as long as I did in the other. But a lot of the ones that you see for War for the Crown were just flat out from Ultimate Intrigue. If you're talking about the influence system or the verbal duels in Pathfinder First Edition, or some of those, the persona system was new in War for the Crown, written by Linda, who also wrote the influence system. For Pathfinder Second Edition, in particular, we ported over basically some of our most popular or most used subsystems from First Edition, made some tweaks, but I think that the sort of it's interesting you say you've seen them in Pathfinder Society, because if you look at the start of the chapter, not the first page that's sort of like the menu, but and it has information on deciding when is appropriate to use the subsystem, but the very next page, victory points, on page 148, 149. So that spread is all about, before we go into each subsystem, how do you build one? How did we build one? And those rules are things that, as the design lead for the Pathfinder Society scenarios, when the developers came to me with, like, in 1.0.0 or any of those, even Gen Con releases, and said, well, how are we going to do this thing where they're researching something? I said, hey, well, we haven't finished writing this yet, but use a victory point system. We have this framework. And so for the entirety of organized play, they have known about this framework and been using it. So if you've been playing the PFS2 adventures, you've probably already internalized somewhat the idea of, critical success +2, success +1, failure, no change, critical failure -1. Which is the sort of the accumulative victory point system, the default one that's in the book. And so one of the reasons we did that is it gives you the tools, like Ryan was talking about, and I was talking about with him near the beginning. It gives you the tools to build your own subsystems. But another one is to make them share DNA so that you don't feel so lost and like, oh my gosh, I have to do this new thing and I have no idea what's going to happen, like you might have with subsystems in Pathfinder first. And particularly so that when you do the same thing, it feels like you were doing the same thing. In Pathfinder First, there were at least 4 rules for drinking contests, some of which made characters who were good at one of the drinking contests like, I'm going to do this, just fail, like, immediately. Like, because a lot of them were based on fortitude saves. But I saw one time there was a character, he had 10 constitution, but you know what? He took great fortitude, had a strong fortitude class, multi-class, and his fortitude was great. And he had done well at one of the fortitude drinking contests. Then later in the same set of adventures, there was he's like, I'm going to win this. And it was constitution checks. So, which he had +0 and immediately lost. So, we're trying to not do that by having a framework so that you feel there's some essence of what's familiar while also keeping all of the sort of variety of cool subsystems that you're used to from Pathfinder First. And that's sort of the goal of the subsystems chapter as a whole.
And I really like the victory point system and how it is kind of the generic system that you can just skin to whatever you need. This could be an arm wrestling contest. This could be a bake-off. This could be some kind of boat race. It's like so many things can be run using the same victory point system, and you just have to rename what the victory points are and adjust how long they're taking.
Yeah, I'm totally going to use this in a later subsystem in my home game to have a heist off. One heist versus the other heist.
And we've got infiltrations in there too. But yeah, you could do a heist off. And it's not too hard to adjust to make whatever you want. That is the best compliment that I can hear about this, is that you're already thinking of ways to tweak and build your own variants on the subsystems using the victory point framework.
Now, for influence, I was surprised that this doesn't fit into one of the 3 modes of play, that it's kind of its own, somewhere between an encounter and exploration. Is there I guess there's just no reason to fit it into one of the 3 modes of play if it doesn't naturally fit?
I mean, subsystems sort of are an encounter. They're just not a combat encounter, right? If it's divided into rounds, that means it is essentially an encounter that just does things at a different scale. The core rulebook mentions these kind of different encounters. It just doesn't spend very much time mentioning it, so most people kind of forget that it's in there. But it does mention social encounters might go on a different round and have you do just one thing for the round. Well, turns out those social encounters from the core rulebook is exactly what's going in here. And it uses familiar terms like influence and discover from the War for the Crown, but also from Pathfinder First influence. One thing is, since I've been running War for the Crown since playtest for my home group, which we just finished in 2nd edition, and I had the author of the influence system in my game, and she was, I realized we didn't have to convert really that much because it was fairly system neutral set of rules, or at least what changed in Pathfinder First to Second did not really change the influence system. So we made it easier to understand and shorter and more concise because it was the second time around of doing something more similar, but it's really very similar to the one that you recognize. And I was able to run it out of Ultimate Intrigue before we wrote the Gamemastery guide at that point. Linda said the main difference was it was better in second edition because perception has sense motive. So you can never have a character who can't do anything because you can always do a discovery check with your perception, which everyone has. Whereas in first edition, it was possible that your character had no discovery skills and no influence skills and was useless. Very unlikely, but possible.
A poor
In chat,
Audrey.
Rexa Liquid says, is there anything about familiars in social encounters? I've asked them to elaborate because I'm not sure exactly what they want their familiars to do in these social encounters.
Yeah, there's not like specific rules that say having a familiar means you get extra turns in social encounters, and I think it's up to the group to decide what the familiar is doing in the social encounter and how much of a presence the familiar is going to take based on the amount of time they have, the spotlight potential, how big the group is. And some of the advice in the first chapter can help you figure out how much that familiar should probably be talking and doing things, just dynamically based on your group and what their wants and needs are.
I'm more likely to let one of my players do it if it doesn't begin with the phrase, "Oh yeah, I have a familiar." Research.
After influence, we've got research. Yes,
I
very happy to
loved
see this included.
So much in first edition. It kind of got transformed a bit in second edition to fit in with the victory point system, but it's still most of what I loved about that. And oh man, the research system.
It's pretty similar. It did lose the sort of like you're doing like this different die size based on which character you are, but it is definitely based heavily. It's mostly the research subsystem from Pathfinder First Edition put into Victory Point and Second Edition framework, and with a little bit more direct guidance that when you hit those research point thresholds, something interesting should happen. I think that I hope that the Glade of Forgotten Time sample library that I wrote is inspiring and makes you think, oh wow, yeah, this is not just I'm in some stacks of books and whatever, because something different and weird is changing. The state is changing, and what you're doing and your strategy is changing each time you hit one of those research thresholds.
Less something that I was looking forward to. Next, we've got chases.
Oh no!
Oh yeah.
But did you like the ones that you got?
Okay, I like chases better as it's presented here than any of my experiences in first edition. I haven't run a second edition chase yet to know if I like chases yet. I'm going to
give 100%.
Why did this make it in again?
I'm going to give 100% of the credit for the improvements. Well, at least 90-some% to the Pathfinder Society team who came up with the idea that, like, I was a player who had a lot of dissatisfaction with first edition chases, mainly because they can be great, but there are a lot of traps for an adventure designer where you can design a card that is impossible for some players. And I was that player. The very first chase that was in a Pathfinder Society adventure was a Midnight Mauler. And one of the cards has a trained-only skill for one of the two checks, and the other one is DC relatively high, dexterity-based skill. That if you have on medium or heavy armor, you will not make, unless you were trained in that skill as well. And so my character literally could not pass that card. I was ahead of everyone else up till that point, and I asked the GM, can I just spend 3 rounds and go around this, or some number of rounds? And they were like, no, I have to run as written for Society. And so I was just stuck on that card forever. And that is not completely the fault of the Pathfinder First Chase system, because you could have found a way to design the cards, but it sort of left a trap for the adventure designer of you have to be super careful. And so this new chase system, it keeps the excitement of like, oh, what's this new thing going to be? How are we going to catch up to this person? But it gets rid of the whole, oh, my character can't possibly do this, so now I'm out of the play, by using org play, Pathfinder Society's idea of we're all working together. And sure, my character might not be able to make it through that square very well. I'll give you a critical failure, perhaps, and give you a -1. But that rogue who's getting critical successes can help me. And that makes me feel cool, because I'm like, I'll help you on the next one. I was looking forward to Midnight Mauler, and I was like, I'm going to be amazing at all these other ones, but I can't get there. So I'll be great on a different card. And the rogue gets to feel great, because they're like, yeah, I helped out Mark's character. Mark's probably made a pretty strong character. It's Mark, but I am the one who got Mark's character through that card with my awesome thing that I did that time. So that is like entirely Org Play's idea to do it that way, but I think it really improves sort of the dynamic as a player in sort of a way that is deeper than just the numbers, but more of a like the story and the interactions with the other people at the table over what we had before.
I have had one experience in organized play where a chase really was satisfying, and it did not feel like a chase. I forget what scenario it was, but I can tell you.
Was it the one where the T-Rex was chasing you?
No, that sounds pretty cool. No,
it was
we were
amazing.
in like a manor, and we were trying to get through a swarm of zombies, and it was just matter of...
it's the one in Kadira. That is one of the first ones where you work together. It's the one with the notorious swim check to open the door. Yes. That was the first of organized plays doing that. They also had a one with the T-Rex. It's chasing you, and you don't have to outrun the T-Rex. You just have to outrun the Aspis Consortium, who are also running away from the T-Rex. So, yeah, I think that I hope that if you love chases in Pathfinder First Edition, you will love these chases. That if you didn't love them, in the same way that I had some issues with them, like the example I gave, that you will also love these chases because they are made from a place of love and respect, but also having and experiencing some of the ways it could go wrong.
The idea of accumulating chase points is intriguing, and the advice in how to writing it really does reflect a lot of my issues. So I have some faith in the new chase rules, but I'm still not super excited to get into another chase.
Well, try it out and let us know how it went, and hopefully better.
Infiltration!
Infiltration! So, if you've played Age of Ashes, you've actually seen the prototype for this system. If you've gotten far enough into Age of Ashes, and it's relatively far in, but John Compton just kind of wrote this gigantic subsystem in the middle of one of the Age of Ashes books. And so when we got to Infiltration, we're like, well, John already wrote something like that, and Logan did a design pass on it in Age of Ashes as the design lead of Age of Ashes. So, all right, let's do this. And this was a very crunchy subsystem that we just handed directly to Liz because it was coming hot off of Age of Ashes, where Logan had seen it and said, Liz, let's see what you can do with this. And she came back with so many amazing questions and other ideas of how to make it even easier to understand than in Age of Ashes, which I think it now is, thanks to Liz. And then I went through it too, so it's gone through the minds of a lot of really skilled designers by the point that it's gone through John and Logan and Liz and me, and hopefully now it's like super amazing Infiltration, but we'll have to see when people start using them in adventures.
Then we've got the Reputation system, which is a little familiar to me because I played through Hell's Rebels, although it seems like it's a little more group specific. I guess in that one, the group was the city that you were trying to influence. I like the idea of Reputation. I like the art that accompanies it with Variance and Harsk.
Yep.
Are in the what are they called? That's not the stocks.
It is the stocks.
It is the stocks. Okay.
Yep, and this was heavily influenced by the organizational influence system that Linda wrote for Ultimate Intrigue. And it was the interesting thing about this system is that it was hard to call it the Reputation system because Pathfinder Society has Reputation, but we kind of wanted it. It's similar, and we wanted it to be the same, but then a lot of other names were floated, and eventually it was so similar that not only did we keep it as the Reputation system, but we have that little sidebar that reminds you that, hey, there's also a reputation that you can gain that works very similarly to this in Pathfinder Society, too, with the different factions as you're playing the game.
After that, we've got Duels, which is a system that I understand why it exists, but I've never felt I need in my game. I
feel like the dual subsystems are ones that are cool, but that most people skipped in all of the books in Pathfinder First Edition. And I'm hoping that by the lower footprint of it, that it's easier to just put into your game and therefore less skippable than the ones before, because I read it all in Pathfinder First Edition. I'm like, this is cool. Psychic Duels, whoa, this is just trippy and awesome. But then I did wind up using a few Psychic Duels, but the other ones I almost never used. So I hope that these duels are like quick and easy enough to insert into your normal situations that you can feel like it's not and so much overhead that you can't just be like, hey, I'm going to reroll initiative and decide if I'm using intimidate, deception, or perception.
All right, leadership. I feel like this is something you're going to have a lot to talk about.
Well, I mean, maybe not. I did work on this leadership section too. It turns out that while Logan is writing like amazing advice sections that are super long, that there are a lot of other sections that were in the book too. But leadership is a way for you to sort of build up your fighter's fort that's just like you're running, or your mages wizards guild, or your rogues thieves guild, and build a base of operations, build like be a general, be an archmage, or a headmaster of a school. And so we wanted to make sure that it allowed you to do that, but while being decoupled from the idea that it necessarily is just going to make you more powerful in any kind of combat situation by getting tons of other characters that are on the battle map. Because that's a separate thing that you also might want to do depending on the group size if it's small. But we didn't want it to be like a feat like in Pathfinder First Edition that was just, it should be free if you allow it, and not be like it's a cost, so I feel like I deserve to get something from it because I spent. It should be more of an opt-in. If there's a good idea to bring NPCs, then you get it, and you get it for free. Yeah. And that's how it works here.
I mean, there is no other feat in Pathfinder First Edition as strong as leadership.
Yeah, for sure, because it gives you a second character.
Mm-hmm. A legion of skill monkeys.
Yeah, it gives you a corporation.
Yep. Whereas here, the organizations have people, but they are loyal to you, and they are not going to just turn on you randomly. But they are also their own people who work for your organization for a reason. They really look up to you. They probably think you're the awesomest. You're like this amazing, maybe even intimidating and hard to approach, or maybe not, depending on your character's style character. And if you ask for favors for them, they're probably going to help you out sometimes, but they're not like sort of like you said, a corporation or some kind of a sweatshop that is just making magic items for you constantly and never sleeping, or only sleeping and then waking up and making magic items for you the rest of the day, or anything like that.
I mean, when I first saw that this section was in the book at all, I said some words we're not allowed to put on this podcast.
Oh no!
Then I read it and I was happy because it's the exact opposite of leadership, and it more reflects my experience in leadership positions, especially for large organizations. And it is that it's more of a burden and a responsibility than it is a benefit. And you don't level up and then get followers. You have to go recruit people to level up.
Yeah, as someone, I love letting my players get tons of followers and even bringing extra NPCs into the fights if they want and having giant battles. But I also recognize those weaknesses. And so it was, again, written from a position of love, but also wanting to give that element, exactly like you said, to kind of drive it away from a power gaming choice that you feel you're picking for power, and more of a story choice that you feel you're picking because you want your character to be a leader. That's what they are when they're a more powerful character.
Kitsune Warlock is in chat saying, don't diss Santa Claus and his leadership min-maxing.
Oh no.
Hexploration. I am really happy that this made it into the Game Mastery Guide. This was another thing that it's like, it feels really core to how you should be running certain parts of the game and how you should be moving about the world, but it was in weird places in first edition, and it in the Game Mastery Guide and in like a year one product feels right.
I can't disagree. That's why it's in there.
I love hexing, and it's weird because hexploration just disappeared from the game and the hobby for a 15-year time period, and it was always referenced as, hey, remember when we used to adventure on these giant hex maps? And then I guess about 8 years ago, like whenever Kingmaker came out, and then everybody realized that it was super fun again, and now I've seen it in like all kinds of adventures.
Yeah, I think Kingmaker was part of the Renaissance, but just always like it's just kind of fun to explore the unknown and see what's out there. It's sort of like the iconic Sandbox campaign is one where you're just exploring and just seeing what's behind at the end of that river. Is it a dragon that could kill you instantly? Maybe it is. You get to find out.
It gamifies the aspect of exploring and makes the players an active participant. Whereas without exploration, what usually ends up happening is the GM will describe a couple of obvious options. You might come up with one to add on top of that. You'll narrate for a few little bits. Maybe he'll write encounters for it or not. But a lot of times it means that you're just going to roll a couple of skill checks and then move past what could be some of the most interesting part of an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, vehicles. I am glad to see vehicles are being incorporated again early on into the game's life. I think that this offers a really interesting way to add dynamics to an encounter, to a chase, and having more set rules so that I could build an encounter around something, knowing that, you know, there's rules for how to drive all of these different vehicles, and the vehicles all have different stats. Very happy with that. And happy to move on if you don't have any stories.
Well, no, not really. I mean, this is one of the some of these subsystems, including vehicles, are one of the ones that after Steven was already gone, we had him freelance for us, and he did. And so, and the rest of us also like went in and crunched some of these numbers and made some adjustments. But it's not really a story that's very interesting to a non-designer on this one. Just we hope you enjoy the vehicles and the steam giant and some of the airships and other amazing vehicles that are in there.
All right, variant rules. We talked about the amazing art that it introduces this chapter. We've got variant ability score generation, which is back to points by, but nothing really randomized, right? Unless I missed it.
So randomized ability score generation is more powerful. I've seen people actually online complaining that this book doesn't have a rolling variant, but the core rules has it. Like it's
yes,
so important that the core rules has that variant. So this has all the other variants that were not as prominent as the rolling variant, and therefore did not make it into the core rulebook. From gradual ability boost, so you don't get them all at once, to point buy, but full point buy, and the alternative scores. Now, this is one of, if not my favorite chapters in the book, but I did last Friday just do a stream about only this chapter with Eleanor. So if we are running
we are running very long.
Yes, if we're running long on time, I could say go watch that, and I will, instead of telling you about everything, I'll follow your guys' lead about the ones you want to ask me about for interesting side stories or questions that you have.
All right. So ability score variants, I like that it exists. Moving on to alignment variants. I like adding the idea of gradients, although I doubt I would ever use alignment variants. I've never had the issues that other people have had, just because I think there is already gradients built into how you can apply the core rulebook of alignment system. Deep background. So if people want more of the randomizing and creating and fleshing out the background, instead of just choosing a single thing that says vaguely defines your character and gives you a lot of choice to expand on it on your own, this is the opposite of that. This is really making it a much crunchier system. And
you were kidnapped from an academic community, and you were friends with an undead, and you and a fellow PC were both patrons of the arts, but you also ended the relationship of another PC. That is something that could have happened based on I just randomly picked one from each of those tables. So it's that deep of a background.
But can you die during character creation on this chart?
No. The closest you can come is having already been dead before character creation. I think there's one where number 8 on major childhood event. You died or came so close that you walked the boundary between life and death. Add the Die Hard feat to your background options. If you selected instead of a skill feat, you aren't trained in a background skill.
Yeah.
So you can have died before the end of your character creation, but you can't die and then lose the character during character creation. So there you go. And Ron Lundeen actually helped us out with these deep backgrounds. Most of the variants in this chapter, I just wrote the variants in this chapter, and Logan did a pass on. But Ron is a very, as you know, amazing storyteller, and he wanted to tell some stories about these backgrounds.
Next section we've got, it's called Feats and Features, which I find a bit odd category for what we've got in here. We've got dual class, so that's a new version of Gestalt, and I like actually that dual class covers that. It's an old term for multi-classing, but it's a much less obscure word than Gestalt is, and so I think it's a lot clearer. It's a pretty straightforward system. I actually was surprised at how easy it would be to implement, unlike, say, some previous versions of Gestalt classes.
I'm curious. I'm not aware of Gestalt appearing anywhere in first edition officially.
I don't think so. I believe that the Gestalt, as Gestalt, is a 3.5 on Earth Arcana variant. Pathfinder first edition, even in Unchained, it did not present that particular variant, but we've got it here. And I can tell you the reason this is called Feats and Features is because it's all about the sort of the pace and timing and combination of how you give out feats and class features. And so dual class, that's 2 sets of class feats and class features. Free archetype, that's a set of archetype feats that you get for free. Ancestry Paragon, twice as many ancestry feats, roughly. Simplified ancestries, no ancestry feats. And simplified skill feats, no skill feats. So it's all about we made a game that we felt was sort of like the Goldilocks of the right amount of choices, so you're always choosing something, but you don't feel some players. And I know for someone like me, this could never happen, but for a lot of people, you could get inundated and be like, oh my gosh, I leveled up, I have to pick this many things. It happens. And if you're watching this and you don't think so, I was surprised too when I first became a game designer, but it does. So we gave ways to take it up and down, because there are groups out there like me that just can't stop wanting to make more choices on their character, and also groups that are like, this is still kind of a lot, right? So that's why it's called Feats and Features.
The free archetype suggestion is one that I'm actually going to consider, because it's a really intriguing idea. Some of the archetypes that have come out are already some of the more inspiring options that have been added to the game, and they're robust, and so it's asking for a commitment. And the free archetype could be a way of saying, like, we're still all getting used to building characters in the new edition. Archetypes might be a little intimidating, so why don't we ease into them by just saying it comes at no cost. Level 0 characters. It only gets a single page, but I like it a lot.
I really like level 0 characters. One of my most memorable games in 3.5 was a game where we played through, gosh, who made it? Goodman Games, I think. Heroes Are Made, Not Born, where we all played level 0 NPC classes, and were just the peasants who had to deal with the ogres attacking our town because the heroes took our gold and took off with it.
Eleanor talked about Goodman Games Dungeon Crawl Classics as well as an example of level 0 characters in the previous stream. So apparently they do character creation with level 0. You just bring a bunch, and then whoever survives is your character.
Oh, wow.
But the reason it's 1 page is, I mean, we felt that we were willing to put 2 pages in the outline for this, but also one of the most gratifying things as a designer is when you have it concise and really worded enough that you fit it in less space than you think, and it has everything you wanted. And it did, which is good, because other things were over. So we realized that after I wrote it, that it's like, yeah, this is what you need. And it even gives you a second variant, and it all fits in 1 page. So that's why it's 1 page. It's because this is what you need for 0 level characters. In fact, we built the system to make it easy to just A-B, but not C. Woo! And it works you out to about the strength of a -1 creature.
Yeah, I like it's just most martial classes, all spellcasting classes, monks and alchemists get a little bit special attention. It really is easy to implement. I like it.
That's if you take the apprentice option.
Okay. No, that's true. I didn't even think of it as an option, but you're right. It is not. No, I feel like I would if I ever did level 0 characters. It feels like an important part of it.
Yeah, it depends on if you want them to be a farmer and just be a farmer, or if you want them to be a squire, right? Those are
Right.
different stories that you tell at different points in time. Yeah, and you even could like set it up so they start as a farmer, and then their next thing is they level up sort of into a squire and get those apprentice options, and then when they level up again, they're really first level. If you really, really like the 0 level gameplay.
My 0 level character was a porter with a 3-legged donkey
Okay.
called Tipsy.
Oh,
We kept Tipsy till 17th level.
Tipsy was a wonky donkey.
Oh yeah, from the baby book.
Yeah, exactly. I happen to have a couple of babies. Magic item variants. What can you tell us about this, Mark?
Well, magic item variants are something I'm very passionate about. They are something that I had added to Unchained after it was already completely ordered before I got to the company. But when we got around to it, there were some parts that were shorter than we thought, and I pitched, and all the designers were like, "Yeah, sure, new guy, you can do that. That sounds good." The automatic bonus progression, and so I'm very glad to see it in here. We honestly considered both of these variants for the core game, and we picked what we picked because of the players in the surveys that said +5 is way too much for these weapons when we're running with them. The difference between having it and not is too much. Please reduce it. But we would not like to see the pluses all be in the person. We want some of that to be in the weapon. So that's what we did, and we put it up to +3. But we also have a variant.
I will say I was disappointed that the weapon quality version of that from the playtest didn't make final, so I am glad to see it here.
I'm also disappointed it didn't make final, but it didn't because the only reason you could remember it with a name that was expert instead of +1 was because back in the playtest, expert always gave 1 and master gave 2 and legendary gave 3, but now trained is 2 and expert is 4, master is 6 and legendary is 8. So if you just are a new player and you see it's a master sword or something like that, you have absolutely no clue what that means. So then we said, okay, so we still have to say +2, but then people are never going to think that that's not magic. We had a time when we were putting it in and we've written the rules for it where it was like, yeah, it's +1. That means it was made by an expert and gives you +1 to hit, and it's not magical. And like in testing that over with people, they were freaking out and not able to. Like, no, it's got to be magical. It's +1 from before. So then we realized neither of those would work, and because of terminology and understandability, really was the main reason that it had to go all magic. But then that's when we said this has to be a variant in the Game Mastery guide because a lot of people wanted it too. It was kind of even how many people cared about it a lot, but we thought we found a way that was better than the playtest to do it, and we found out we didn't because of how it would have to be expressed to the player. It's an interesting thing about design where what you first want to do for philosophical or mechanical reasons can then run into something completely different about usability, and then you wind up changing it.
Well, what did you run into?
Oh, I told you. What we ran into is that Expert, Mastered, and Legendary in the playtest always meant Expert always meant add 1, and Master always meant add 2, right? In the playtest, Expert had level +1, and Trained was add your level. Whereas in the final version, that is not even remotely close to what those terms mean, and so it was too hard to tell that term meant 1, 2, and 3. So then we changed it to +1, +2, +3, but it's quality. And then that just led anyone who had played Pathfinder first was like, no, that's the magic, right? And that was a problem there. And so what I said, that's how we got down the path that we realized like there was no way that and then we came up with other ways, but then the name of the weapon became so long and kind of like unwieldy that we eventually realized that it would have to be a variant.
Proficiency without level. What's the motivation behind this section?
Just a lot of people in the playtest who wanted to tell a story that is less like the stories that we usually try to emulate, where the 20th level character can just mow down thousands of level 0 soldiers and want to tell something more like, the novella for the Wheel of Time, where one of the best swordsmen in the setting is ambushed by 8 competent soldiers who had turned bandit, and he's like 8 versus 1, where they can cover all my blind spots. I'm probably not going to win, and he did because he's a main character, but he expected to lose, and that is a sort of a different sort of philosophy than Pathfinder players are used to, and that we usually tell. And people in the playtest, some of whom came from 5th edition, which has more of that kind of storytelling, where the threat remains really dangerous to you for longer, and higher level threats are less dangerous compared to you. Some of them who are used to that are like, oh, what can we tell these kind of stories? I guess we can't. Or just new players new to the hobby in general who read grittier stories like Game of Thrones or any of those. And so basically we put that in there so you can tell those stories too when you want to. But we think that for the baseline Pathfinder story that we've been telling since Pathfinder first, that's not the one that we would use. So that's how we responded to that segment of the fan base who wanted it but was not the majority, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually, I relate to that when it comes to the next section, which is skill points. So breaking down skills from proficiencies to going back to a granular system. That was when, the change for 2nd edition, the justification was everyone just puts all their skill points into a very small suite of skills anyway. And I'm like, no, I don't. I spread them out pretty nicely. And
now you can.
Now I can, yeah.
And you get a mechanical incentive to do that, where you'll have more skills at expert than the person who was just going up to legendary.
Take that, expert.
And then the next section was one I actually was surprised I didn't see in playtest. The stamina system from Starfinder.
Yeah, we knew we didn't want that to be the main system for PF2 in the same way that we knew when the core design team started the design of Starfinder as well. And Jason Bowman is a major Star Trek and sci-fi fan, and he knows a lot about storytelling in that genre as well. And so to get the storytelling to fit the pacing of some of those sci-fi stories that you see, that's how stamina sort of arose for Starfinder. And since it's a different pacing than our default Pathfinder pacing and the sort of epic fantasy storytelling, it wasn't in the core for Pathfinder 2nd, but you might want to tell stories with those kind of pacings, especially if it's like a fantasy western. So that's why we put it in as a variant.
How does it compare to Starfinder? Is it just straight up that system?
It's very, very similar, except for that it's able to be a little more pure in the use of resolve points specifically for stamina, because Starfinder has a lot of things that are like, oh, but maybe you'll spend this resolve point for this cool power, and then they sort of compete, which is its own different, interesting choice, but can sometimes lead people to hoard it and not do the cool power. Whereas here it's just like, it is only for refreshing stamina.
Then the final 50 pages is Chapter 5, an NPC gallery.
Yes.
Just because of how late we're going, I don't want to go into too many, actually, or really any of them, except for if there's any that particularly stand out to either of you. Is there a favorite?
I'll let you
NPC?
say which ones stood out.
I don't know. They're all pretty clever.
You can throw crates or use a serving platter as a shield in a pinch, and all sorts of... There's also sidebars that are related to the NPCs. Let's just give an overview instead of a specific. Yeah. They're grouped by how you use them, rather than by level or alphabetically by the NPC. So laborers or magistrates or healers. And when you go into that section, you get a variety of those types of NPCs and 2 useful sidebars. Like healers, here are some services for medical things that you can have someone do, or some ailments that could happen. Or foresters, here's some famous forests in Golarion and penalties for poaching. It's sort of like what you see in the bestiary. It even uses the same little logos as the bestiaries sidebars do to distinguish whether it's a lore sidebar or a world sidebar or what have you. And so that's basically what you get, is a bunch of different useful groups of NPCs that we felt you might want to have in your game. Plus, hey, look, there's an anti-paladin. That's pretty interesting, huh?
That is pretty interesting. Is it the anti-paladin though?
No, it's a different.
I mean, it's an NPC, but it is an anti-paladin. It's more similar to the one from the playtest Doomsday Dawn adventure. It has a woman with a big great axe, I think.
And not kicking a puppy.
Yep, it's not Steven the anti-paladin, as Steven said that the name of that one is. Steven claimed that the name of that anti-paladin is Steven, so I now will call that anti-paladin Steven as well in honor of Steven's wishes.
It is fascinating that character never got an in-canon name.
Well, technically, he wasn't on the cover of something. He was just in an interior illustration. So
he was in several interior.
Yeah, a lot of them. But he was not drawn by Wayne Reynolds using the official Iconics process. So he was not exactly an iconic. But Steven, the pig kicker, is just part of anti-paladin lore.
A couple of things that I do want to shout out to about this section. A lot of art, a lot of really good art. Mm-hmm. And I do like the table of contents at the beginning of the section, because like you said, the characters are grouped by category. So having them also listed alphabetically with their level and page reference makes it easier to find the ones you're looking for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also, the charlatan on page 209 kind of looks very similar to our editor Lou. So it's kind of and also is on the back of the book. So
I don't know if I know Lou. I'll have to track them down at PaizoCon and compare. Maybe get them to sign the back cover.
There you go.
All right, so that is the Gamemastery guide, and also that is a breakdown rather than a review. So I do encourage people to let us know what they thought of this format. Reviews always tend to go long, so as we do this more often, if we do continue to do the breakdowns, I think we'll get a little better at pacing it. But there was a lot of great information from you, Mark. It was a lot of cool insight, and it's a great book. This is one of my favorite Game Master books that I've read in a long time. It is a great balance of advice, tools for running my game, tools that are just flat out like rules options that I need, and then just things that are making me think about how I can make 2E just fit more into my style as a GM, because I'm still struggling with some GMing of 2E, but I figure I'll be getting better at that with practice, and especially with this book in hand.
I absolutely agree. I think that this book is going to get used almost as much as a used Ultimate Campaign, and for similar reasons. Is this thing is just full of tools that is going to make my games better, simply because it's making me think about aspects of the game that if I was doing things my own way, I would skip over or fall into habits that I have. And just the good advice, as well as the tables and the recipes and the NPCs, is just going to keep spicing my game up. And it's going to be a book that I reference probably for the duration of my second edition life.
Now, we did have a piece of... yeah, so congratulations, Mark, on another successful hardcover book. I think it's something that people should be checking out. There was an announcement for another hardcover that we were hoping to get into, but we really don't have any time for it. So just to mention, as we shared on Facebook, Lost Omens Pathfinder Society guide was announced, and Mark, you said that you were the design lead on it?
Yep. Now, that does not mean the same thing as being a design lead on, say, the Advanced Player's Guide, which I was, because the designers are the ones who sort of do a lot of the piloting on the Advanced Player's Guide, whereas the development leads, Eleanor, Farron, and Luis Loza, did most of the piloting on those Lost Omens books. But design lead means I do get to peek in there, discuss things with them back and forth, and help out with mechanics. So there's some cool stuff in that Pathfinder Society guide that I think a lot of people are going to like. And I know that some of the rules I wrote for it that I heard back, and Eleanor was like, "Ooh, that's in there," so that made me feel good. She has a good sense of like things that are cool that people are gonna like. So I think that means that people are also gonna say, "Ooh, that's in there," and I won't say what it is because this is not an officially sanctioned Pathfinder Society guide interview, so I won't reveal any secrets.
It is a book we look forward to talking about a lot in the future.
Mm-hmm. Also, if you didn't notice, it has an amazing cover.
It's got a really good cover. All the Lost Omens guides, especially starting from the third one, Gods and Magic, just have different and cool covers.
Yeah, what's the NPC one called? The character guide?
The character guide is the one that you didn't like the human section, but like the rest of the stuff of.
What's the NPC
The one that has all the different species is Lost Omens Legend.
Legend, yeah, that's got a cool,
that's got like the more movie
poster.
the movie poster title, or no, it's a movie poster style cover, and which is really cool. And then you've got the triptych for Gods and Magic, and you've got that awesome one for the Pathfinder Society. They're great. I really love those covers.
All right, we are going to be wrapping things up. Mark, you might as well stick around for the wrap ups, right?
Yeah, might as well. I mean, I've made it this long.
All right, we'll be back to wrap things up right after this.
Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups and shoutouts.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 222 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News Reviews and Interviews podcast. Thank you, Mark, for joining us for an in-depth breakdown of the Gamemastery Guide.
You're welcome. Glad to be here and hope that everybody enjoyed the breakdown and the behind-the-scenes sneak peeks.
So before we go, we do like to shout out to some things that might be of interest to our fans. What I've been doing is going through all the podcasts in my podcatcher alphabetically lately and giving them shout outs. So the latest one I'm giving a shout out to is one that people have probably heard about since it was the answer to a Jeopardy question recently. That is Buffering the Vampire Slayer. It is a watch through where every episode analyzes an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Sorry, my background just snuck up on me. Anyway, I'll leave it. I don't know what I did. It's a solid show. It's Jenny Owen Youngs, who is a folk singer who concludes every episode with an original song inspired by the episode. So there's a lot of little things like that make it more than just a couple of friends talking about an episode. There's very educated analysis of the shows. The two hosts go into it with certain preconceptions, memories of what they did, and you can see how in the conversation they are changing their point of view and really broadening it out. And that's how I feel as an audience member. I'm listening to the podcast about a show I've watched through several times and enjoy quite a bit and have thought about quite a lot, and yet I'm getting new perspective every time I listen to those episodes. So Buffering the Vampire Slayer. There's network related shout out. Randall has been talking about his he decided to call it No Direction Societis, the play-by-post game that he's running. It is launching, I believe, tomorrow. He's officially opened up the Session 0 channel. So if you're on Discord and you're interested in following our play-by-post, Randall has spent a lot of time creating a lot of really cool tools so that we have our characters speaking in character when we use a certain HTML, and we're going to have a lot of bells and whistles for a play-by-post via Discord, where he's running us through all of Pathfinder Society as of now, which he has ordered in a way that we will be leveling up consistently and always hitting the marks that we need to be. And we'll also have some kind of meta plot so that the regions that the adventures are set in is consistent and has an arc. He's been working on this probably since January, I think is when he first came to me about it. No, it's probably before January. And anyway, it's something that he's been very gradually working towards. We've talked about it a couple of times in the past now. It officially starts. So you can sit in as an audience member. You can read his behind the screen channel where he talks about the jamming decisions he's making. I think this is going to be really cool. And just because it's kind of tucked away on a small channel on Discord, I'm worried it's going to fly under people's radars. So I really do recommend people check it out and just see what Randall showed me we can do with our Discord chat.
It's crazy. I mean, he's been geeking out about this with me for months and months now as he's been developing it. And man, the stuff he's able to do with Discord bots is just boggling. If no other reason to join our Discord is to go check out his Discord bots. I mean, it tells you freaking spell and weather effect rules and anything you want to know.
Do you have any shout-outs, Param?
I do. I want to
Okay.
shout out to Dan Kelly of Lion Tower Miniatures. Some of the people that have been following my social feed may have noticed that I picked up a resin printer finally broke down and got one to print minis and gaming bits and, all the cool things that can be 3D printed. And one of the things I noticed immediately when I was printing my stuff is that the sculpts out there for the 3D printed files are absolutely amazing. And Dan Kelly is one of the best going. So I recommend you all go check it out. If you don't have a 3D printer, there are plenty of people, go check on Etsy, that have got licenses from these artists in order to sell prints of their stuff. And I will definitely be talking a lot more about my experience with 3D printing minis, but just because of my excitement and because I've been really happy with this, and because Mr. Kelly, if you're one of his patrons, which I signed up for immediately just so I can get all the stuff, and I will be keeping that active as long as he keeps producing stuff, we just chime in on the Patreon chat and it's like, hey, could this have a square base that's 20 millimeters? And then we get one. Or, hey, can you change this? And then he does it. So he's like really supportive of what the fans want from his miniatures that he designs. So I'm been really impressed with both his management of his own community and the quality of his product.
Mark, anything you'd like to shout out to?
Sure. I'd like to shout out to the community of my Twitch stream, Arcane Mark, some of who were clearly on Twitch today due to the fact that we saw some of the Arcane Mark emojis, such as the squirrel emoji we created for when people go off topic into some random side tangent, has popped up at least twice, and some of the leshies that were on there. So that is a show that's on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Pacific, and then Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And we cross-host with No Direction, so you could just stay on this channel at those times if you want to see those shows. And you can join the discussion community for Arcane Mark at, I'm putting it in the chat, invite.gg/ArcaneMark. And hit me up on Twitter at Mark Seifter, just my first name and my last name, very uncreative. So I'm going to shout out to them because I'm seeing all more leshies now. And Linda recently created a giraffe cannon emoji because we needed it after a recent episode, and that's probably going to go on there once we get Twitch to agree that giraffe cannon emoji is awesome. So
yeah, definitely. If you're a fan of No Direction and you haven't checked out Arcane Mark, you've got to. Some of the like really core deep discussions they have on the nature of the game and gaming is some that you're not going to get anywhere else.
And I feel like Linda's advice on making dynamic encounters in Arcane Mark was so professional grade that like I see many parallels to what she submitted to us for the Gamemastery guide, which then got published. So like there are definitely things I'm like, oh yeah, that's similar to some of the advice she gave on the Arcane Mark episode. So I feel like I don't want to just oversell my own content, but that we have some really cool advice for GMs, players, and fun little workshops and stuff that we do. Plus interviews of Paizo staff on Thursdays when we can steal a Paizo staff member.
Finally, I want people to know that PaizoCon is coming. It is 86 days away. Thanks to No Direction's official PaizoCon countdown correspondent, Darren Kaldemeyer, for confirming that. We haven't finalized our plans, but Param, we're both going, right? No matter what. Yeah.
It's what we're going to be doing that is up in
exactly,
there, not
yes.
whether we will be there.
Right. So we have nothing to announce yet other than that if us being there influences you going to PaizoCon, then you can book knowing that, yes, we will both be there.
I look forward to having long chats about awesome gaming stuff and random nerdity with many of you.
And that's the show. Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
Mark, go ahead.
I'm Mark Seifter.
And if you want to find the path, you need No Direction.